Good morning. A warm welcome to the Humanist Community Sunday Forum. My name is Alex Havasey. I'm a member of the Humanist Community. The Humanist Community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, fairness, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist Community if you haven't done so already. Membership forms are available on our website. A special welcome to those with us for the first time. We invite you to continue watching our forums and other events. You can find all our events listed on our website. Also, please aid us to continue presenting these forums by contributing to the community. You can find out how to donate to our edition on our website, which is www.humanist.org. Okay, today we have David Weinberg, who's going to teach us about medical frauds in history and what they can teach us about their parallels in modern day. What was the violent rate of device of the 1920s? What was Miss Winslow's soothing syrup? And the Microbe Killer by William Radam in 1886. We'll also examine recent case of a U.S. stem cell clinic in Florida. To answer the dangers of pseudoscience in medicine, we have critical thinking, scientific rigor, and effective regulation to protect public health. Our speaker, David Weinberg, is a full-time academic vitreoretinal surgeon. He's a professor of ophthalmology at the Medical College of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, and his interest in less than scientific-based aspects of medicine is sparked by injuries from these patients, investigating their questions, investigating their questions. What led to his investigation was inquiries from his patients, and this led to his discovery of numerous brand new things were implausible, unproven treatments of potential blinding eye diseases. David.
Thank you very much for the kind invitation to speak. I'll share my screen. I'll be happy to answer questions either during or after the presentation. Let me see if I can get my screen sharing to work. You should be seeing my slides now. Let me know if there's any problems. So today I'm going to bounce around a little bit through time and history and tell a story of what I think is a recurring theme. In my day job, well, I'm recently retired, but I was an academic physician. Specifically, I was an ophthalmologist and a retina specialist. And in my my side gig is I started collecting antique medical artifacts. This is a display case in my living room, and I know exactly when this hobby began, and it's this object here was kind of my gateway drug to collecting these artifacts. I happened to be in an antique mall on New Year's Day a few years ago, and I saw this case. I opened it up. I didn't know exactly what it was. I knew it was probably had some kind of a medical use, and it was really kind of cool. And I left the store, and I went back an hour later, and I bought it. This is called a violet ray device. It was popular in the early part of the 20th century, like the 1920s. At that time, electricity was kind of a novelty. It was, in people's homes for a fairly short period of time. And this was considered a miracle device. This thing plugged into the wall. It created very high voltage, almost like a Tesla coil. And you'd insert these glass tubes into this handle, and they would glow purple. And if you put it near a body part, it would arc and create this kind of tingling sensation. And this was advertised to be the cure to just about everything. There's a handful of wands in this that came with this device, but there are catalogs of um, dozens of different designs. For every body part and every orifice, there was a glass wand that was advertised to be a cure for that. And these things were very popular for a long time. And you can kind of judge how popular they were by how many of these are now available on eBay. There's a lot of these. I happened to find one in really good shape that was really complete. Um, so this is kind of a pattern that you'll see recur throughout my talk is that whenever there's a new science or a new technology, it is almost felt to have miraculous properties and is in medicine is deemed to be the cure to just about everything. You can see on the lower left part of this slide all the diseases that it is intended to cure. This is probably the oldest item in my collection. This is a bottle from the middle of the 1800s. I think it was patented in 1856 for a concoction called Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup. This was advertised to be the mother's little helper. If you had a kid that was teething or had colic and wouldn't sleep, you would give them a few drops of this or a teaspoon of this, and the kids would fall asleep, and mom would have a good day and a good evening. These are kind of the advertising typical um, from this medicine. Mrs. Winslow's Soother Syrup, it always showed this very content mother with these very angelic, cherubic kids that were well behaved and barely conscious. And it was very successful because it really did work. If you had a fussy kid and you gave him some of this, there was a good chance that they would doze off for some period of time. And if you're lucky, they might even wake up. This drug had a secret ingredient. And in fact, all medicines at that time were secret ingredients. There was no expectation that there was any labeling of ingredients of these drugs. In fact, it wasn't until the early 1900s that regulators required medicines to list the ingredients. So what was the secret ingredient? Well, there was what alcohol was one, but the second was morphine, lots and lots of morphine. In fact, if you back calculate the dose of morphine that was recommended for this medicine, it was would have been considered an overdose today. And there were multiple reports of kids receiving this medicine and never waking up. It's really unknown how many children were literally killed by this medication. So back this more on topic for this meeting, this is another bottle that I obtained just because it was a cool looking bottle. One of the things about this hobby is you obtain artifacts and then you kind of look up the history. This was a bottle, and I'm going to connect what I learned about this bottle from the 19th century to these events which came across my desk professionally, and I think there is a link across the centuries for these two events. And I'll introduce these two entrepreneurs, medical entrepreneurs from the 19th century and from the 20th century, 21st century, who shared a common ethic and common business strategy. And that is kind of capitalizing on the latest in technology and science to promote their particular business. So we'll start off in the 19th century. This is the first time all diseases were cured. For some reason, it's necessary to do this over and over again through history. So the timeline of this story is the evolution of the germ theory of disease. There were some important discoveries in the middle to late part of the 19th century that really cemented germ theory as a working model of many diseases. There were the discoveries of Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch really kind of cemented germ theory, and it had become common knowledge in popular culture about germ theory. But it really took another 40 or 50 years before the miracle of antibiotics really met the full potential of germ theory. But there's one part of this timeline that's not taught in science class or history class, and that's it. In the year of 1886, a man named William Radam announced that he had cured all diseases. So this is the hero of our story. His name is William Radam. He was a gardener in Austin, Texas. He had no formal education in science or medicine or microbiology, but he was kind of he could walk the walk, he could talk the talk of science, and he was a big fan of science, and he was kind of a super fan of germ theory. And he expanded germ theory to believe that not just certain infectious diseases were caused by microbes, that all diseases were caused by microbes. And his gift to the world was his Microbe Killer, which he patented in 1886. And Mr. Radam had tremendous commercial success with his Microbe Killer. He became a very wealthy man. He was able to move from Austin, Texas to a penthouse on Fifth Avenue in New York. He had distribution and manufacturing centers all over the United States. And this was his bottle. This is kind of what hooked me into this story. I just like the imagery on the bottle. It's a little hard to project what the bottle looks like, but there's a print ad that shows the same thing on the right. His logo was this our hero in a suit with a club in apparent mortal combat, apparently with the Grim Reaper. It was called the Microbe Killer, and his humble tagline was "Cures all diseases." And he really seemed to believe that, or at least for the purpose of his business, he believed that. Like I said, he wasn't really trained as a scientist, but he could kind of talk the talk. He wrote a book about the Microbe Killer. He was not very complimentary about the state of medicine at the time, and because they didn't accept his radical views. But his book was full of pictures and full of testimonials, including his own, claiming that after taking his own medicine for 6 months, he was feeling better. He gained weight. His hemorrhoids were cured. And he was a true believer, apparently. He wasn't without his critics. There was a chemist named R.G. Eccles who analyzed Radam's Microbe Killer and found it was mostly mundane ingredients like a little bit of red wine, a little bit of acid added to make it taste like medicine. And he out and out called Mr. Radam a fraud. And there were lawsuits back and forth between Mr. Radam and Mr. Eccles for defamation. And so when you're a high-profile, famous entrepreneur like Mr. Radam, you want to hire a high-profile lawyer. And so who did he hire? He hauled the famous orator and lawyer Robert Green Ingersoll. He hired him for just a minute because Mr. Ingersoll lost his first case, and so he was promptly fired by Mr. Radam. So that ended their relationship. So after 30 years of successful business, the regulators finally caught up with Mr. Radam. The first attempt to regulate medicines at all was the 1906 Pure Food and Drug Act, but that particular law didn't really stop Mr. Radam because that only required listing of ingredients. It wasn't until 1912 when the Shirley Amendment disallowed any unproven medical claims, and that was really the beginning of the end for the Microbe Killer. He was one of the first targets of this legislation. They found him in violation, and that was really the beginning and the end, or the beginning of the end of the Microbe Killer. So that ends this story in our saga. And now on to the next. This comes into the 21st century, and the timeline for this is the stem cell science, the emerging field of stem cells. Just as a little refresher for those who are not familiar, stem cells are cells that are capable of dividing and differentiating into one or more different cell types. And when scientists talk about stem cell potency, they're talking about basically the versatility of those cells. So a totipotent stem cell, a fertilized egg, for instance, can eventually differentiates into the placenta and every body part of the adult. And as stem cells mature into more and more specific stem cells, they become less and less potent or less and less versatile. And even in adults, there are stem cells. They are not pluripotent or totipotent. But for instance, in your bone marrow, there are stem cells that can differentiate into every kind of blood cell and platelet. So they are limited in their development, but they are stem cells. So the timeline for this story is the evolving stem cell science. The idea of stem cells wasn't new in the 20th century. In fact, bone marrow transplants are really the first stem cell therapies, had been known from the 1950s. But there were some important discoveries in the early part of the 20th century in the ability to manipulate and control stem cells in ways that people began to recognize that stem cells really were a potential means of treating diseases. And there was a lot of hype around these findings in the early part of the 20th century. This was a Time magazine cover from 2009, saying that the revolution in stem cells was coming and they could save your life. Stem cells were going to be the cure to many, if not all, diseases and kind of the fountain of youth. Almost every periodical of that time had a cover and an issue like this. And stem cells did then and still do have great potential as medical therapies, but the science has progressed much more slowly than anticipated. And still today, there are very, very few proven therapies that are available using stem cells. The potential has not quite been realized yet. Hopefully it will someday. But the lack of evidence hasn't stopped a whole industry in direct-to-consumer stem cell clinics. There's probably one in your backyard. You probably see ads in your newspaper, radio ads for the stem cell clinics advertising near miraculous cures with very, very little evidence. This was all sort of background noise to me until 2017 when I read about this event. And this event was published in the very prestigious New England Journal of Medicine. It reported 3 women who sought treatment at a clinic in Florida. They were treated for a condition called age-related macular degeneration. They all received stem cell treatment, and within a couple weeks, all 3 of these women were legally blind as a result of the treatment that they received. Just to put things in context, macular degeneration is a scary disease, and some patients do lose vision. It's generally very slowly. When these patients were treated, when they went in for treatment, they all had pretty good vision. They all would have qualified for a driver's license in their home state based on their vision. And within a couple of weeks, all were legally blind. All 3 of these women. So the place they were treated was a stem cell clinic called US Stem Cell in Florida, in Sunrise, Florida. This is a page from their website, and they tout themselves as a world leader in research and development of stem cells and regenerative medicine. The chief medical officer at the time of these events, she's no longer with the company, but at the time was this woman named Kristen Comilla. Miss Camilla was really a kind of a superstar in the regenerative medicine field. She was a highly sought after speaker in regenerative medicine. She was very much the face and the voice of US Stem Cell. Despite the fact that she really had no formal training, at least no degree in biology or medicine or science or stem cells in any way, her background was in chemical engineering. Now later, many years later, after these events, she did get a degree in stem cell science. It was from an unaccredited offshore college in Panama. But at the time, she didn't even have a fake degree in stem cells. But she was very articulate. She was very persuasive. She was very much an evangelist for stem cell treatment. As I mentioned, they touted themselves as being the world leader in stem cell research and development. Based on SEC filings, you can get some information about their balance sheet. They had an operating budget of several $1 million a year. The part that had been set aside for research and development was about $6,000. Research is very expensive. $6,000 doesn't get you much in terms of research and development. And I looked up to see what you could get for a used car for $6,000, and you can get about a 2008 used Toyota Prius. So that was their investment to research, which made them a world leader, apparently. So the mighty stem cell, these is a list, an incomplete list of the diseases that U.S. Stem Cell and Kristen Camilla claimed that they had had success in treating. Um, and she was quoted in an interview saying that basically their stem cell treatment could be used to treat any organ or tissue inside the body that needs healing. Now, she wasn't quite as pithy as Mr. Radam, but I think she's kind of a kindred spirit in believing that her particular treatment was the cure to many, if not all, diseases. So just to talk about these three patients and the treatment they received, these weren't the only three patients that were reported. This was the first report. There were a few other cases of patients treated at U.S. Stem Cell and other stem cell clinics that received a similar treatment and had similar unfortunate outcomes. So the way U.S. Stem Cell operated, they used a very similar treatment for all the diseases they treated. They referred to it as adipose-derived stem cells. And how were these patients treated? Well, these patients paid their money. I think it was about $5,000 for treatment. They went in. The first thing they did was they received liposuction. Liposuction is basically inserting a big needle into the fatty tissue. In this case, they used their belly fat, sucking that fat into a big syringe. That tissue is then processed. Um, the They took this fat from the liposuction. It was processed chemically. It was also processed physically. They spun it down into a centrifuge, and they collected the very bottom part of the material in the centrifuge, and that part is called the SVF, or stromal vascular fraction. The other thing that they did was take blood from the patient. They spun that down. They took a small portion of the blood, and that part is called platelet-rich plasma. Now, the stromal vascular fraction from the fat, that's where the stem cells supposedly resided. To the extent that there are stem cells in stromal vascular fraction, and there can be, they're probably the wrong kind of stem cells to treat anything inside the eye. These were connective tissue type stem cells. And the material in the platelet-rich plasma, that is that's not advertised to have stem cells in it, but platelet-rich plasma is very much the secret sauce of regenerative medicine. If you look up stem cell platelet-rich plasma, it is used for just about everything in the regenerative medicine field. So what they then do is mix these two components together. And basically what they had was kind of a soup of a variety of biological tissues. These were processed, but they're not really purified. So this contained all different kinds of cells, all different kinds of growth factors, all things which I would not want injected into my eye. But nonetheless, they took these things, they injected them into the organ that they were trying to treat. And for this case, that's the eye. And unfortunately, that's led to the problems these patients experienced. This was the same kind of treatment they injected into knees and elbows and shoulders. And unfortunately, the eye is very unforgiving to tissues and drugs that can be injected safely elsewhere. And these patients underwent a cycle of very severe complications and with leading to their loss of vision. These patients did seek treatment at reliable, reputable, actually very high quality medical centers, and despite treatment by some of the best doctors in the country, they still lost vision. So what went wrong here? How could this possibly happen? Well, stem cells kind of are in what's called the gray market. There are FDA does have rules about how biological tissues can be used. But quite frankly, they're pretty ambiguous in the way they are worded. It's possible for these stem cell clinics to declare themselves to be exempt from the regulations because there are certain uses which are exempt. And unfortunately, FDA has not been very aggressive about stepping in and intervening for these particular clinics. So this New England Journal, New England Journal of Medicine article first appeared in a preprint in 2016, and despite FDA's reluctance to step in, they did so in this case. They showed up for a surprise inspection of U.S. stem cell in April of 2017. They issued a warning letter to U.S. Stem Cell. They said, you are not exempt from our regulation and you are in violation of numerous regulations by the FDA. And the way U.S. Stem Cell responded, they just basically defied the FDA. They were defiant. They said that the FDA was wrong in their interpretation of the regulations, and they continued to practice. It wasn't until the following year that they filed legal action in the courts against U.S. Stem Cell, and ultimately a judge told U.S. Stem Cell to cease and desist, and they finally had to stop this particular type of activity. The business still exists, but they're no longer doing this type of stem cell treatment. So it took a long time before they were finally reined in. So what went wrong here, and could this have been prevented? Well, here's my interpretation. I think it could have and should have been prevented. Uh, this clinic, despite declaring themselves to be a leader in research and development, they did no independent original research. They went directly to a fee-for-service treatment model. They did no preclinical research, no safety studies. Again, they just started treating patients. And unfortunately, in spite of what the cautious person would do, if you have a new treatment that's not really established as safe or effective, you might opt to treat one eye at a time, but they opted to treat both eyes of all these patients at the same time. I'll argue that there was low plausibility for benefit from what I know about eyes and what I know about stem cells. This particular type of treatment for this particular disease had very low plausibility that it was going to work. And I think there was a high plausibility for harm. And I attribute this company just was over their head in this particular therapeutic area. They had no expertise in their inner circle of anybody with experience in ocular anatomy, ocular physiology, toxicology. And to the best of my knowledge and ability to find out, they did not engage any outside expertise in this area. And I say there was a high plausibility for harm. I don't just mean that there was no safety data for this particular treatment. I mean that there were affirmative data in the literature that said this was an unsafe thing to do. Generally, before you're going to engage a new treatment in a new disease, in a new organ, you look at the literature and see if anybody's done this or if there are any studies in humans or in animals to guide your decisions. And it turns out it's pretty easy to find that out. There are very sophisticated search engines in medicine that you can use, but in this case, Google was all I needed. If you enter the search terms platelet-rich plasma, which is one of the components of their treatment, and intravitreal injection, which is how they delivered the treatment, there's articles that come up. There was old research in the literature injecting this platelet-rich plasma into the eyes of rabbits and also into the eyes of pigs, showed that these animals predicted the outcomes of these women. These animals suffered many of the same complications that these women did. So this was predictable and avoidable had they done their due diligence. So after the uh, the government tried to, FDA stepped in to stop U.S. stem cell. They went on a public relations campaign and fundraising campaign. You can still probably find this video on YouTube, United States versus Kristen Camilla, about all the patients, people they had cured or helped with their stem cell treatment, and how that, we can see who the real victim is here. You can see the tears of this poor woman who only wanted to help patients. So back to our timeline. In the time when this article was, when these three women were reported in the literature, there were about 570 direct-to-consumer stem cell clinics in the United States. The FDA stepped into this particular stem cell clinic in 2019. And in 2021, the number of direct-to-consumer stem cell clinics in the United States had almost quintupled. So there's still a lot of work to do. Um, so, I think this story of Mr. Radam with germ theory and U.S. stem cell uh, with stem cell treatment have several features in common, and I think it reflects a pattern. Some new emerging science captures a lot of public attention, and there are extremely high expectations for medical breakthroughs. And unfortunately, sometimes science is slow and it can't keep pace with expectations. A few people that represent themselves as on the vanguard of science make seductive claims that are outside the bounds of contemporary evidence, and sometimes people get hurt. And the regulators really can't keep pace in the new frontier, and the public is vulnerable. So I've written about these events elsewhere. I wrote 3 articles in the Science-Based Medicine website about this particular U.S. stem cell clinic and in Florida and the patients. Kind of the first draft of this story connecting U.S. stem cell to the Microbe Killer I wrote up in the UK version of the Skeptic magazine. So if you're interested in further reading about that, this is where you can find it. Unfortunately, there's a lot of good, but also a lot of bad information about stem cells in the internet. If you're looking for reliable sources of stem cell information that's directed toward patients or potential patients, there's an organization called the International Society for Stem Cell Research that has a lot of good, reliable, scientifically vetted information that patients can access. There's a little more, if you're interested in more technical information about current events in stem cells and really up-to-date reporting, there's a researcher named Paul Knopfler at the UC Davis School of Medicine. He is himself a stem cell researcher, and he's been a very vocal advocate for responsible use of stem cells in the laboratory and in the clinic. He has a newsletter called The Niche, which you can subscribe to, and every week he kind of updates us on the the newest developments in stem cell research, both good and bad. And I thank you all for your attention, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Liz.
So, are the eyes a particular bad place to inject stuff in? Because my understanding is that they're immunologically privileged, which means that it limits the inflammation that i.e. the reaction of the immune system if something goes wrong.
That's a good question. Yes, there is some immune privilege in the eyes, but they are still very vulnerable to, because of the unique anatomy and physiology of the eye, they are very unforgiving to having things injected in. Unfortunately, there are many examples of drugs which are very innocuous um, elsewhere in the body, but being very damaging in the eye. I think one of the problems with this is you're injecting biologically active tissue into the eye. You're injecting connective tissue cells into the eye. The last place you want to have active connective tissue, growing connective tissue cells is in the eye because of the very delicate structure and transparency of the eye.
And the fact that the immune system isn't going to be as active in some way, that probably makes it so that it can't fix problems that normally could be fixed.
Well, unfortunately, if the immune system doesn't really fix problems. It creates inflammation, but like I said, it's not just immunity which causes the damage in the eye. Some of these are toxic reactions from the drugs themselves. And I think in this particular action, it's the biological actions of these actual biological tissues that they injected in the eye that did the damage.
I was wondering if should there be some legal repercussions if you're injecting stem cells and you don't have adequate protection, or even adequate professionalism, people who know what they're doing?
Yeah. So in this, I know of at least three, I think maybe all three of these women. I know there was at least two of these women and another woman that was reported later that did sue U.S. Stem Cell, and I think they all were received awards. I don't, they were, the cases, the awards were sealed, so I don't know how much the courts awarded them for the injuries, but they were successfully sued. But the details of those settlements are unknown, to me anyway.
Okay, but there's no criminal charges.
That is, to the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
Sandra.
I imagine that we think that the FDA must pre-approve things that are presented. So is there something wrong with the FDA? Is it our gullibility? Are there other countries that are better at protecting people from things? I think back to the thalidomide problem, and that at least Canada, I think, although I believe it had been used initially, prohibited the use of that. So why are we not safe in the US from whatever new thing comes along?
So it's a really interesting question. There was a time when people had to leave. There was a thing called stem cell tourism, when people would have to leave the United States to get some of these treatments. And then some of the providers in the U.S., I think, just got bold enough to actually do it. Yes, I think there has been some criticism of the FDA in these cases, for not further clarifying and for not defending or specifically going after some of these providers. It really is true if you read the regulations about, it's complicated because, and the regulations reflect the complexity maybe a little too much, and they are written in ways which are ambiguous. There are concepts like minimally manipulated. So if tissues are minimally manipulated, that's one line of exemption. If they are what's quote unquote homologous use, basically if you're taking tissue from the eye and it's being used for whatever lack of better language, for intended purpose of those tissues in the body, that's one line of exemption. If it's removed and replaced in a single surgery, that's another way that they can be exempt. So I think the FDA really can do a better job of clarifying and regulating what they actually regulate.
Suma.
I don't know. I honestly can't speak to what the regulations are in the other countries. Actually, thalidomide was US, actually, that was one area where they did pretty well. There was one particular reviewer in the FDA who stop thalidomide from being used in the United States because of concerns about safety. That was one of the success stories of the FDA.
Hi, I have two questions. Well, not related to eye though. Like I recently read about CRISPR, the CRISPR, this, and with the aging population, we are seeing increasing number of Alzheimer's and other disease, age-related diseases. And the claim was, and it was from, I would not say reputable, but Popular Science magazine, mentioning that CRISPR can cut those proteins in our brain and stop the progression of, say, for example, Alzheimer's. My question is, all this information, especially who are not scientists and people, common folks, how they are going to do, believe or not believe those stuff and go into rigorous, as you mentioned, to go into the rigor of almost like a scientific exploration to determine whether CRISPR is really the cure for many diseases, especially age-related diseases. And the second question is that the social media and the internet are proliferated with all these claims from naturopathy people and alternative medicine, they call themselves, and they make millions of dollars. And their PR is so strong. And FDA is only one entity. We need something to protect the consumers from all this proliferation of PR materials and the claims. And they're not really interested in, for the welfare of the population, they're interested in making more ROIs. So there should be some kind of an institutions or agency from the government side to protect consumers from all these false claims and false notions and not seek out scientifically or medically tested medications. Can you comment on both of them, please?
I'll do my best. I'm not an expert in CRISPR, but what I understand about it, CRISPR is potentially a very powerful tool. It's a tool that allows gene editing where they can go in and do specific editing of genes. And it's most promising for genetic type diseases where there's a gene you can identify and correct or replace if it's a genetically coded disease. There have been some, I believe there are some therapies now that are being approved that are based on CRISPR technology. I'm maybe confusing things a little bit. I think there is a treatment for sickle cell disease, which is based on CRISPR technology. For diseases like Alzheimer's, it's a lot more complicated because it's not a single gene disease. There's a lot we don't understand about Alzheimer's, and the idea that you could go in and gene edit away Alzheimer's seems a little unlikely right now, but it's an area way outside my area of expertise. The idea about better regulation, better protection of consumers, I agree with you completely. It butts against free speech and all those arguments, but I think there needs to, consumers should be protected better against some of the claims that are made. I don't think we're going to see that happening in the next few years.
I had a couple of comments. One of them is that some of these funny alternative medicine things, as long as they don't make a medical claim, they can get away with saying anything they want. That's my understanding. Maybe you can comment on that. But also, like, there are some things they inject into the eye, like for macular degeneration, for example. how do they know that doesn't harm people? In other words, is it they do a lot of medical research beforehand before they say it's okay, or what do they do? I'm just curious.
I think there were a couple questions in there. One is about, you said that as long as medical claims aren't made, that they can get away with saying, certainly in the supplement, I don't know if you're talking about supplements particularly, that's an area where the supplements have a lot of latitude about what they can say, and just short of making a medical claim, there's all these statements they can make that supplement supports the immune system, something which is really meaningless, but has a lot of implied meaning. They can't say it's a treatment for a particular neurologic disease or a particular immune disease, but they can say it supports the immune system or supports the brain. Things which are really meaningless, you could say that about anything, but that's how they market these drugs, and they are allowed to do that. They're allowed to make these quote unquote structure function claims, supports the structure, supports the function of something. But they theoretically can't make specific medical claims, although they come very close to and cross that line quite a bit. There are many medicines that are currently used as medicines that are injected into the eye. Those drugs were tested. They went through preclinical testing in animals. They went through small phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 studies in humans to determine that they were safe and effective, at least to the FDA's satisfaction for treating particular diseases.
Alfred?
Yeah. I'm an optometrist, so I'm curious about using, other than anti-VEGF injections for wet AMD, are there any other injections for wet AMD other than anti-VEGF injections?
Not really. That's really the state of the art of treatment right now, is anti-VEGF therapy. Because anti-VEGF treatment really does target the harmful effects of wet macular degeneration, and right now that really is the best treatments that we have, and they're pretty effective.
Yeah.
Teresa? Teresa, you're muted. You're still muted. I'll come back to you. Liz?
So in terms of the origin of the feces, as it were, of all these claims and everything, there was a son-in-law of the Utah Senator Orrin Hatch that owns the largest supplement firm in the country. And Hatch was a very powerful senator, put in this law to help him and other people.
Yeah, as I understand, that's true. He was one of the authors of the current regulations, and I think he was from Utah, I believe, and there's a lot of supplement companies in Utah.
Okay, Teresa, you still got your hand up. We'll try you again.
Yeah, thank you for unmuting me. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble. A couple of things. First of all, thank you so much. This is so valuable for me personally. We have this family of
You seem to have frozen.
Can you hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, let me move. This house of mine has strange connection. Maybe try over here. Anyway, can you hear me now?
Yes.
You can hear me now? Okay.
Yes, we can.
This is the better spot in my house. Okay, so we had stem cell therapy done on a horse with an injury, and and we were told it worked, and maybe it didn't, but they did take injections of fat from their thigh. So I'm thinking maybe that was totally a con job on our part. But more significantly, our daughter with EDS has had PRP injections for her EDS, which is a ligament disorder, connective tissue disorder. And I'm wondering, but that was, both of those were performed with the horse by a vet and with our daughter by a medical doctor. It seems like that's helped her joints stiffen up somewhat and less apt to hypermobilize. And I'm wondering, have you heard anything about that regarding EDS or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome?
Oh, okay. I am not familiar with that. I mean, I have some familiarity with that disease. I'm not an expert by in any means, and I don't know anything about the state of the art for platelet-rich plasma for that. I will note that a lot of the advertising for these stem cell clinics and platelet-rich plasma is used in a lot of these in the same types of places. Some have stepped away from the stem cells because platelet-rich plasma is a lot easier to obtain.
Right.
And a lot of the indications that these places advertise is for orthopedic, a lot of these injections are done in the joints. These stem cell clinics tend to focus on that. But I wouldn't feel qualified to comment about the particular instance you're talking about.
Okay, thank you.
Dana. And you're muted. Dana, we still can't hear you.
Who
Okay,
did you call on?
I'll go on to Sandra.
Okay, so it sounds to me as if the FDA is not something we maybe should have relied on in the past, and maybe even less going forward to the future, since this administration is anti-science, so we're kind of left to our own research. So one of the things that's very popular now is this microbiome idea that you could take the feces from somebody who's got a healthy microbiome and administer it somehow to a person with stomach problems, and that would correct the microbiome. So that sounds on the surface improbable, but if we were to research that, what would be the best way to do it? Because if I want to even look up something like, will niacin help my blood pressure? I get such a wide range of answers, and I don't know how to do fact checking on all the different things that I'm likely to find. So what can we rely on?
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, I try to remember the first part of your question about the microbiome. Microbiome is the new. It's a really hot area. It's kind of not maybe quite as hot as and hyped as stem cells were, but there's going to be anytime there's something new like that, there's going to be a lot of claims out there that are not supported. There's some plausibility to it, and that's true of a lot of these treatments. It's not impossible, but it's probably not proof. A lot of these claims are not well supported right now by the evidence. That there is one true indication for these fecal transplants. There is a disease that seems to be effectively treated by fecal transplants, but it's very specific. It's a condition that you can get of overgrowth of a certain type of bacteria in your GI tract as a result of antibiotics. And it can seemingly be treated but that's very specific. It's done in a medical center. It's done by people that are professionals and know what they're doing. Outside of that one indication, I'm not sure there's really been any. I mean, there's all kinds of foods and probiotics that are been touted as being good for your microbiome. I think that's still an open area of question. And the other question is about where do you get reliable information? That's a great question. I wish I had a single answer for you. I have written a fair amount for science-based medicine. It is a It's basically a collective blog by people who are interested in trying to provide reliable information. You can search that website and see if there's articles. A lot of the major medical centers have websites, medical centers. Those have been contaminated a little bit by alternative medicine, but for the most part, they're probably fairly reliable. If you have a trusted, physician, that would be another place to go. But the internet is the wild, wild west, and you can find people advocating for just about everything. And so you have to be careful to vet your sources.
Dana, you still got your hand up. We'll try you again.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to make a comment or two. A couple of years ago, I have a knee. Okay. Everyone has a knee problem. And and when I heard about a description of the incredibly crude and gory sounding procedure that knee surgery entails, in other words, that they lop off the ends of the lower bones and the upper bones and put on a metal plate and all that. It sounded so awful. I thought, I'm going on the internet and find another way. And so I got a list of possible treatments for knee, and there was hyaluronic acid injections, there was cortisone, and there was PRP. And I thought, ooh, PRP. That sounds so intriguing. I mean, they take some of your own blood and use it, and it gets stem cells and inject it into your knee, and you heal yourself. Whoa, that sounds really good. So I'm a Kaiser member. So I went to Kaiser and asked about it. And they said, well, the only thing we do is the radical surgery. We don't do any of those other treatments. They don't last. And some of them are very ineffective. So I went outside and went to a sports medicine guy, and he said, we will do cortisone. That's very effective. We will do hyaluronic acid, much more expensive, but we do not touch PRP. It's just too complicated. And, maybe he meant also not a good idea, because if there were a lot of questions about it. So that was my experience with PRP. Thank you.
Now, you said stem cells and PRP kind of in the same sentence. PRP is not stem cells. There's no stems, at least shouldn't be stem cells in PRP.
Where they took, I thought the description that I read was where they drew some blood from the patient, somehow manipulated and extracted some kind of factors, and then used those to inject into the knee, and then those were stem cells. I didn't know. I'm not a biologist or whatever. So maybe you can explain to me about that, about withdrawing blood and extracting things and then injecting it into a joint.
Yes. So platelet-rich plasma is they take blood, they spin it down in a centrifuge, and then they take one fraction of that blood, which is called platelet-rich plasma. Plasma is just kind of a protein-rich part of the blood, and platelets are these little tiny clotting features in the blood. It shouldn't or probably doesn't contain stem cells. As far as the effectiveness of injecting that into the joints, you're way beyond my areas of expertise as an ophthalmologist. But my understanding is that it's not without some plausibility that could help at least temporarily. But my understanding is there really haven't been good studies done to show that it really does work.
Thank you.
Liz?
So the one treatment they're using for with the microbiome is after you get a bunch of antibiotics, and all that's left is something called C. difficile.
Right.
And that's a very weak. It can't compete with the other bacteria, but if there are no other bacteria, then it proliferates and takes over. And basically the treatment is they take someone's poop, they put it in a pill, in a capsule, and you swallow it, and you get lots of bacteria, and the C. difficile can't keep up. And that's the treatment, and it seems to work.
Okay, Masuma?
Yeah, I have more of an academic question. How did they, what I see, being a physicist myself, I see any kind of R&D work done in the labs go to reach the public media much faster than, say, in physics or even in engineering. The claims are much, much less. Is that because medical science or biochemistry are more people related, and that's why all these claims proliferate and also because of the clinical tests are so lengthy compared to other scientific disciplines that there is a time lag for the medical research or biochemical researchers to really hit the market before all these claims, before even the lab tests are going on. Can you comment on that? How to not disseminate the R&D efforts and even the clinical test results before it goes to the public?
I'm trying to understand. I think I understand your question. The fact is that all these, people publish their data, and that's public information, and it's hard to control whether a news media is going to pick up that particular research study. And to be honest, institutions do have public relations departments, and sometimes will amplify results of studies probably beyond the point where it's productive. But it's all public information, so anybody can hype. Once that information's public, it can be hyped. It can be printed in newspapers, in the National Enquirer, in Popular Science. I don't know how to kind of get around that. If I'm understanding your question correctly.
I was going to comment, it does seem that every new development that comes along, people want to use it for whatever else they don't understand. It was electricity, it's now stem cells. It's like maybe quantum mechanics explains consciousness. We don't understand either one.
Well, AI is big now. You can use an AI advisor to help you pick your supplements and to help direct your medical treatments. Every age has its own.
I'm old enough. I can remember back when they discovered chlorophyll and they could put that in toothpaste and all kinds of things, and didn't seem to have any adverse effects. Santa.
Yeah, well, I guess we're all familiar with the notion of a second opinion. So I guess what I'm trying to do is ask, pardon? Oh, no, I'm asking not about the quacks, but about actual medical doctors, because you do get different opinions from different doctors about what's a good thing to do. So how many doctors and many of the insurance programs, they don't really allow you to consult somebody else unless you want to pay for it for yourself. So how can you even trust that your medical doctor is advising the right thing for you? And if it doesn't work, are you just lucky that he didn't harm you?
These are really tough questions, and I don't pretend to have the answers. I mean, I think oftentimes for these questions don't necessarily have a right or wrong answer. There are more than one way to proceed with medical diagnosis and medical treatment, and they're not necessarily because one is wrong or right. There are more aggressive approaches, there are surgical approaches, there are medical approaches, and depending on the patient's individual situation, one may be a better option for that particular situation. And yes, doctors do have different opinions, they have different experiences, they have different specialties, which lead them to different opinions. I think you kind of have to listen and consider the advice in the context of your own needs and wishes. And if you're not satisfied that you can make the right choice, ask somebody else if you can. And you're not likely going to get every doctor to agree on the exact same course of treatment. It's just the nature of an inexact science like medicine.
So it sounds as if we really have the wrong idea about what medicine can do for us, like that the doctor knows all there is to know about that disease. So I don't know if we should change our idea about science in general or about medicine in particular.
Again, the idea that there is a exact, correct, optimal course of action that you can predict it's not realistic. It's not medicine is not an exact science like that.
Okay, Senna, you got the mic.
Well, I haven't heard any mention of things like Mayo Clinic and Harvard research and things that sound as though they're doing a lot of interesting research, and maybe you could answer some of these questions better than anything that's been mentioned.
What was the question?
Was there a question? Okay. There are a number of things like the Mayo Clinic and things in the Harvard research and others that seem to be very authentic. And I wonder if they're not the places to ask the questions. Did you come through?
It's funny, there are institutions like Harvard and Mayo Clinic that kind of have these halos. And they're excellent institutions. They're very, and I practiced mostly in the Midwest. I practiced for some time at Northwestern and then at the Medical College of Wisconsin. A lot of people would go up to Mayo Clinic and thinking that they were kind of getting the ultimate word. And the doctors up there are great. The doctors at Harvard are great. And what happens in the research lab, it's not. I'm trying to understand and answer your questions. There are many, many excellent researchers all over the country and all over the world. The people in the research labs aren't necessarily the best people to take care of patients, and they're often not the same people that take care of patients. So I think I have a very high regard for academic practice, and I spent my whole career in academic practice, and I think those are great resources. And I think if you're not satisfied with an opinion, an academic medical center is a great place to go if you have one available to you.
Okay,
I'm not sure I answered your question, but.
Okay, thank you. Jim.
I just wanted to make a comment relative to what Sandra was saying. I'm a retired and very obsolete biochemist, but I've been trying to read some of these medical papers in reference to a condition I have, and people just have no concept at all of how incredibly complicated cells are, how many processes are going on simultaneously, and how variable it is because of individual genetics. And it's no wonder that there's a lot of uncertainty in biomedical research, and it takes years to finally gain a correct concept of a lot of these diseases. For instance, Alzheimer's has been working with probably the wrong hypothesis for years. And in fact, one of the leading researchers there had published some rather maybe inaccurate data. Anyhow, the point I wanted to make is that it's very difficult to arrive at the proper treatments for some of these diseases. And the specialists can go into great depths, but most practitioners just cannot possibly cover the incredible amount of knowledge that is available to medical professionals.
I don't have anything to add to that.
I have the impression that and I don't know if you'd agree that the agencies that regulate medicine could be doing a better job, and it doesn't look like that's going to happen in the next 4 years.
Yeah, I'm not optimistic about the near-term future of healthcare and the agencies that we depend on. That's all I'll say about that.
I think the message here might be don't expect a lot from miracle cures.
Well, I think miracle cures are rare. In fact, it's one of the things when I was teaching residents and medical students, you'll hardly ever hear the word cure come out of my mouth because there are very few diseases there are some that can be cured. Infections can be cured, certain malignancies can be cured. If you have appendicitis, a surgeon could go in and effectively cure you. If you had a retinal detachment, I could go in and fix that. But cures for most diseases are chronic diseases, and most of those are not curable. But again, that's a little bit of a rant of mine.
Masuma.
It's just a comment. We have so many medical insurance companies, but we don't have any consumer protection agencies to help the consumers. So why there is such a big imbalance? We rely on insurance companies who don't have any idea what to either approve, as I'm hearing from here, either they approve some procedures or they don't approve, but they don't have the medical understanding. And on the other side, patients as well as the physicians are I would say in a point of at the mercy of the insurance companies, and there are no consumer agencies for the patients to go to seek help from. Can you comment what will be the recourse for patients as well as for the physicians?
I could comment, but I really have no expertise or inside knowledge of any of those questions. I share many of the same concerns that you've expressed.
Again, I think it's a matter of even if there's a cure for something, and we're getting kind of off of stem cells here, but there are a lot of side effects that go along with the cure that you should know about, and you might decide you'll take a chance and continue your present situation. I was thinking specifically of a woman who mentioned that she had a heart transplant, and in the process they severed the nerves between the brain and the heart, which means if something startles you or something, or you get a shot of adrenaline, that's still under your control. The heart beats faster, but normally you'd recognize there's not a problem and you just calm down. And she says you don't have that luxury anymore. You just have to let the heart calm down as the adrenaline level goes down. And I suspect that's true of a lot of medical treatments, that there are side effects that you may not be aware of. In this case, a heart transplant isn't really going to make you the young person you were.